So I'm going to make a couple of videos, one where I'm using Cypress for my end-to-end tests, and then where I've changed around my authentication and role management to use a more generic guard. And then on the other video I'll have a look at sort of the supporting components I'm using for my application, things like categories, teams, and the resource management component. I made a change to simplify my route guards. So you see in here in my app routing module, this is where all the route guards get called. And common thing I wanted to do was to be able to check for permission to access a certain route based on the roles on the user record. And I did this by adding a permission guard and then passing the permissions that I want to look for. If the person has any of these permissions, then they're given access to that route. This is a little different from what I had set up before, where I had a separate guard for each role, basically. So checking, is the person an administrator, is the person a resource manager, and so on, which meant I had multiple route guards. So this is a lot easier. I just pass it an array of roles that the person should allow a person access to the resource, and then the route guard looks through those list of roles, see if the person has any of them, and then we'll give them access if they do. So that's where it's being used in the actual routing module, and then the actual route guard code is here. So both it's going through, it's getting route data that's passed to it, which has an array of permissions. So saving that in the permissions variable here, and then going out getting the user document for that particular user. Just gets the first one. There should only be one for a user. Check with the user exists at all. If he doesn't, then it'll take you back to log on. So basically the case where someone isn't logged into the system at all, it'll throw them back to the login page, and then it goes through. So by default it'll set permitted to false. Then for each permission that was passed in the array, it'll check on the user record to see if they have that permission. If they do, then that is permitted set to true, and at the end of that, if they're still not permitted access, then it's going to take them to the not authorized component. Otherwise it's just going to return to the app routing module with the person indicating that they have permission to access that route. For my automated testing, I'm not using unit tests. So for my applications, to make my life easier, I'm just doing end-to-end tests, and I find that's useful because I can test kind of at the high level what the user's actually seeing, and it can tell me very quickly if I make changes. I can just quickly run the end-to-end tests and see if anything major is broken, and I don't have a lot that is pure functional designs that need to be tested at the unit level. I probably could find things, but this is a lot faster. So what I'm using is a tool called Cypress to do end-to-end testing. This is the website. You can find more about it here. There's a lot of YouTube and internet information about it as well. It's also included in my FBM starter application, so you'll find that Cypress is already present in any application you build from that. The result is you end up with a Cypress folder at the top level of your project, and you have two main areas that are probably of interest for writing the tests. One's called the integration folder, so this is the individual test suites that you're going to set up, and the other one I find useful is this command.js. So command.js is kind of how you put together reusable tests. So I might use tests like logging into the application, or functions like logging into the application from for multiple of these test scenarios here, so I can call this one command and reuse it in all these individual scenarios here. The way I set this up was to have a scenario for each user type, or general user type, so one for the admin, one for someone who hasn't been made active yet, one for people who are set up as team managers, and one for people who are normally set up as team members, and they go through and test the functionality they have and don't have access to under each of these roles. So if we look at something like, let's look at manager user, we see it's going through and it's actually calling those functions that were declared down in this command.js, so like login, email, and then the various major tests in here are being used throughout the tests on this user. But the only other thing to be aware of is there's a Cypress JSON, and in here is where I set up the different users and their access to the system. And now I'll just show you how it runs when I want to run a test, and you get an idea of, you can quickly retest the general functionality of the system quickly after you make code changes, see if there's any major problems that's been introduced. So running the Cypress tests, I bring up the Cypress test runner. That opens a new instance of Chrome in my case. We see all the tests on the left hand side, and we see it as it runs through those tests, and it ticks off which tests have passed as it goes. So hopefully we get through this and all tests have passed.